All right. Ooh, did I get an email just as I started this? Of course I did. Of course I did. All right, cool. Hello, everyone. My name is Luke Thomas. This is my weekly live chat here on MMAfighting.com. Although you could be watching on YouTube, I suppose. You might be watching on Google Plus. I don't even know. But it doesn't matter because you're here. That's what matters. Today on this little podcast that we do, whatever the hell you want to call this thing, 172. That was big. We'll get into the nitty-gritty of that. Let's see. Mayweather Maidana is this weekend. Glory 16 is this weekend. I'm flying to Denver on Friday for that, by the way. I wasn't at the last one. I only fill in, by the way, when Morrow is gone. Morrow has to do, of course, the Showtime stuff for boxing. When he's gone, Kruk jumps up to commentator, and then I take Kruk's spot. Or at least I have for this last one. I don't know if anything else will happen beyond that, but you get the idea. So that's going to happen. Bellator 118 is on Friday. So still lots of combat sports, or if you're just in MMA, you get a week off. But nevertheless, a lot to talk about, even if it's just for last week. To do that, the best place to get involved is on MMAfighting.com, where this window is embedded. You can try on YouTube. I'm not going to make any promises, but I saw some of the YouTube comments from last week. They're actually much more hospitable than they used to be. So maybe I'll start looking at those a little bit more. But either way, you can use it on MMAfighting.com or on Twitter at SBNLukeThomas. And, of course, you can email me at luke.thomas@SBNation.com. Got lots of emails last week, but I was super busy with work, so I haven't had a chance to respond to any of them. So if you emailed me last week and I haven't responded, fear not, friends. I will get back to you. Also, for all the folks who I saw at 172 who told me they watched the chat, I don't know if you were lying to me, but you were very kind, and either way, I appreciate it. So salutations to all the folks who I saw in Baltimore who introduced themselves to me and said they watched this little thing here. I appreciate that. All right. With that in mind and out of the way, last thing. If you're watching this right now, either live or whenever you see this plea from me, let folks know you're watching on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Pinterest, Google+, MySpace, Spotify. What are some other ones? Vine, WhatsApp, Glide. I don't know. Let folks know you're watching this. That's how we spread the word. That's how this works. Yes? Yes. Okay. All right. With that out of the way, let's get this going. First question. I knew it was going to come up at some point. First question, do you think Dana White knows who you are now? Hi, Luke. Your questions in Baltimore were excellent. Thank you. Great job. This person here likes the energy I bring to scrums and post-fight press conferences. I wish you were at every show. Well, I won't read the whole thing, but it's a very, very nice thing. I really appreciate it from Always Learning. Do I think he knows who I am? I don't know. I have no idea. I can't live or die knowing if he knows me or not. He answered all my questions, which is all I really care about. Was friendly enough. No one in the UFC gave me a hard time at all. So, I still think they should credential Josh Groves. I still think they should credential Loretta Hunt. I still think that Deadspin should get a seat. I think that pushing these people out is not the best way to do things. But I can say at the same time that I've written some pretty negative things about them pretty consistently, and they're nevertheless still willing to give me a spot at the table. So take that for what it's worth. Yeah, but does he know who I am? I don't know. I can't wake up worried about whether I'm going to get praise or condemnation. I just have a job to do, and if they intersect, great. If they don't, that's great too. But I appreciate everyone who gave me some good feedback. Thank you very much. Follow up. Does Dana troll the media in scrums in general? He acts like on video he doesn't know who any of you guys, with the exception of Ariel. Is that all show? Is he cool to the media at the events, or is he brash and pompous to everyone, or is it he's cool so long as you don't ask a stupid question, dummy? Well, we don't really hang out. I mean, you see him at the press conference, you get close to him at the scrum, both pre-fight and post-fight, but there's no really any other interaction. He doesn't come by press row and chat us up. We don't go get dinner with him or anything. So it's only those moments. So you see how that goes. The question about does he know who I am or anybody else is? I don't know. Like on the one hand, you think, well, he must because I've interviewed the guy a number of times. It's whatever the evidence you can compile together. But at the same time, the guy is incredibly busy. You saw him on Dan Le Batard. He couldn't even remember what state, or at least it seemed like he couldn't remember even what state that Johnny Hendricks had sold out when he fought Robbie Lawler, which of course was Dallas, Texas. So the guy's got a lot on his mind. He's doing a lot of traveling. So maybe he's just forgetful. Maybe he's, short-term memory is affected by a lack of sleep. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. But it's hard to tell. I also think that, it's fun to beat up on the media, too, whether it's you guys or Dana White or anybody else. It's always really fun to, I think someone, I didn't really care at all, but someone told us that, he called the MMA media clowns on Jay Moore's radio show or podcast. I mean, whatever, Everyone's like, oh, being in the media is such a great job. And it is a great job, but, there's no, there's plenty of praise that you get, but you also get plenty of condemnation, too. You get plenty of people who just, wring you out to dry for what they perceived slightest infraction, be it Dana White or anybody on Twitter or anybody else. So you just have to get used to it. It comes with the territory. It's hard to be a winner, especially if you're publishing stuff that is not flattering, but it's part of the job, I guess, right? Jones is wrestling. Here we go. Jones' performance against Glover was sensational, and he is clearly the greatest pure talent in MMA history. Having said that, what has happened to his wrestling and top control? The old Jon Jones is able to throw around capable MMA wrestlers like Matt Hamill, Vladimir Matyushenko, Lyoto Machida, Ryan Bader, and just smash them from top position. Recently, not only are the throws gone, having been replaced by doubles and knee taps, but he seems far less effective as a wrestler, and when he is able to get guys down, they seem to be get up quite quickly and easily. Well, I think two things. One, just from a strategy standpoint, I think even if you could say that the wrestling hadn't declined at all, which I don't think it has declined, but I'll explain why in a minute. This is the story of the fight that isn't being talked about. It's the story of the last fight that isn't being talked about as much. That the last two fights have shown Jon Jones to be a completely unique, highly effective striker that used to be a guy who could mix it up a lot and now is relying on his striking and the creativity there and winning, but in large part because people have caught up to his wrestling. As much as we heap praise on Jon Jones for his creativity, which we should, and as much as we heap praise on Jon Jones for his fight IQ, which we should, and I mentioned this in the post-fight show with Ariel and Chuck Mindenhall, they're catching up to the wrestling. It's a real thing. So I asked a lot of people about it. I think what's happening is that these guys feel like, particularly in the case of someone like Teixeira, that he knows for sure he doesn't want to be underneath Jon Jones. If there's one place he doesn't want to be, is it with someone? Is it with his back against the cage? Well, that wouldn't be good, but is it out in open space? That's perfect for him as a guy who wants to throw bombs. That'd be great. Is it on top? Maybe it's on top, but it might be a lot of work to get Jones down, get inside. Is it on bottom under, when Jones is on top on the ground? Well, that's just a no-no. There's no way to win there. I know Vitor Belfort sort of framed up for that arm bar, but Vitor Belfort also got submitted off of his back. So take that for what it's worth. You just don't want to be there. He has enough guard passing skills, and if he doesn't have enough guard passing skills, he can just bang on you on top, and he can cut you open, and it's really, really bad. It's a really, really bad place to be. So I feel like, and it's sort of I think also people believe that, and now quite erroneously, but I think they used to believe that not only does he mix up his own strikes with the elbows and the jabs and the front kicks and all the different sort of things that he does, but that part of what makes them more effective is the fact that he mixes it up. I think what we're learning is that it's effective on its own without him mixing it up because he's had to make it that way. So I think partly it's guys just simply doubling down on training, being like, I cannot be on my back. Glover's hips could not have been more ready to turn. He would never relinquish the double. And that's at the very end. Jones is also able to get it. Also, keep in mind, Jones has taken down everyone he's fought, which is a pretty amazing accomplishment. But he got 2 takedowns, I believe, maybe 3 in that fight. But it's true. It's true. They've really caught up with the wrestling. I don't know if it's because he hasn't practiced it enough. I don't know if it's because he hasn't varied the techniques enough. I can certainly tell you it's because these guys are practicing their takedown defense. I can tell you that for sure. That's what it is. Takedown defense is easier to learn than wrestling itself, the offensive wrestling. So it's a lot of those things, you know. But what's crazy was a traditional knee tap. You have the one arm sometimes under the armpit, where you're lifting to one side to force them over, and then you're blocking with the other hand. Jon Jones has such long arms; he's able to get the crook of his elbow in it. Man, if someone did that to you, like, that is ridiculously deep on a knee tap. I've actually never seen it until he did that. I mean, maybe you could see if someone got someone just caught dead to rights looking, right? But 9 times out of 10, you're blocking with the hand, or you're actually cupping with the hand. He does it elbow deep, and these guys are still getting out of it. I mean, that tells you that they're really, really prepared. But it also tells you that maybe Jon Jones start doubling down on some other techniques, working on some. I mean, with that kind of reach, you would think you'd have a really good ankle pick. You know, I don't know, but he's going to have to work on it. Definitely one thing that no one is talking about because everyone's raving about the whizzer crank and some of the elbows that he used and some of the techniques that he employed, and with very good reason. But the other side of the story is his takedowns have become far less effective, far less. Now, he's also fighting better guys. I mean, you mentioned Hamill, Matyushenko. I mean, Matyushenko just retired after a loss to a submission to Joey Beltran in Bellator. I know they fought years ago, but you get the idea. All right, talent level in women's MMA. Call me a hater, an idiot, a sexist, whatever. But Jessamyn Duke's performance versus Betch Correia was one of the worst displays of MMA I think I've ever seen at the UFC level. Your argument for women in the UFC has always been that you would rather see high-level women in the UFC as opposed to the 50th-ranked male middleweight. I see the logic, but frankly, I would rather watch Nikita Krylov fight than Jessamyn Duke, who happens to be the 14th-ranked woman in the UFC. I just don't think the depth or talent level is there in the women's division, and I am just plainly not interested in seeing women other than Cyborg, Ronda Rousey, and a few others fight. Someone follows up, a different person follows up and says, I agree. In my opinion, women's MMA is overrated. Everyone always says women's fights are so fun to watch and steal the show, but the last 2 women's fights, Tate versus Carmouche and Correia versus Duke, were boring, and excluding a Ronda Rousey fight, the women's fights never steals the show on any card. Well, first of all, let's be fair. Tate versus Carmouche was a lot more exciting than Correia versus Duke. Okay, second round was better, and the third round was way better. I mean, it was a close fight, and she almost got finished. I'm not saying it was a barn burner, but come on, Correia versus Duke was just plainly terrible, and Tate versus Carmouche was not. I mean, if we can't say anything else about the fights, surely we can agree on that. But whatever. Let's talk about your point. Well, I'm not really ready to say that I'm going to throw the baby out with the bathwater because one fight was bad, right? And I agree, it was bad. I also have to agree. I was very underwhelmed at what I saw. None of these camps are going to ever hire me to corner their fighters. That's fine. But I've seen enough MMA to know what I'm looking at and to differentiate levels. I don't think Jessamyn Duke is a bad fighter. You know, when you say someone's a bad fighter, like, what does that mean? Like, what does it mean to call someone a bad fighter? I'm not sure, but it could mean having just no requisite skills. It could mean having completely lopsided skills. It could mean not being a courageous fighter, super risk-averse. I don't know. But I don't think it's fair to call Jessamyn Duke a bad fighter. What I do think it is fair to call her is she's simply inexperienced and green. She's still very, very, very early in the skill development process. And this is what I'm talking about when I tell you guys, you can say whatever you want about someone like Bubba McDaniel, and I know he was cut from the UFC. Bubba McDaniel off of his back is freaking light years ahead of Jessamyn Duke. And it's not an insult about her. She's just hasn't had that much time to get better yet. It takes a long, long, long time to get good unless you're somebody like Jon Jones and you're just some savant genius at this thing. It's hard to get good. It's ridiculously hard to get good. And I think Jessamyn Duke has shown some promise. She had a couple of, you can tell she'd been drilling and practicing those throws with Rousey. When Correia would get in on her, she would get the overhook, and she would try to use it for a throw, but she couldn't win the scramble. off of her back. She really had really poor. I don't want to say it exactly. Like when Correa was on top, the ability to shrimp, to get at least a knee inside, to create some separation, to get a knee inside, there was really none of that, you know. There were just seemed like some fundamentals were lacking. And dude, it's not like I'm bashing her. Fundamentals, like, oh, it's fundamentals. Those are the basics. Dude, the basics are the most important, hardest things to master because you have to get those right all the time. It's great to have barambolos, and it's great to have, you know, Jon Jones leaning over and then driving up with the elbow. Those things are great. But having a jab and a cross and a hook and an uppercut that's clean, precise, and well-timed and everything else, those are the things that matter. Footwork matters. I just feel like they listen, the UFC's in a position where they can't just have 6 or 7 females. They got to have more. But the downside to it is that in bringing over these fuller divisions, the divisions have revealed themselves to be woefully behind the men's game. Doesn't make them bad fighters because I think a bad fighter to me would have to be somebody who's like, that's as good as they're going to get. I think Jessamine Duke has time and all the skills in the world to improve. I would like to see her get a jab as someone as tall as she is, and not just a fist jab, but a leg jab. I would like to see more of that. I would like to see her have a, you know, she didn't get a whole lot of chance to show it, but if you're on your back and you can shrimp in, granted, it's harder when you're long and the opponent on top is tall to get your knee inside to get back, but I would like to see that. I thought Correa was being very risk-averse. It wasn't like she was doing aggressive passing on top. So, yeah, I'm with you. What you saw was just like, oof, that's bad. But what I would also like, if you didn't like that, is to extend that discriminatory, and I don't mean that in like a Donald Sterling discriminatory. I mean discriminatory in the sense of, you know, separating good from bad. I would like fans to start shedding some of that discriminatory eye more towards the men's game. I agree with you that what we saw in that fight was just simply not a level of fighting we are accustomed to seeing in the Ultimate Fighting Championship. Fair enough. But you need to acknowledge that we see something similar to that a lot more in the men's game without the same level of critique, and what gets them by is whether or not the fight is action-oriented. In other words, if you're criticizing Duke versus Correa for it's basically not just being boring, but this is low-level MMA, low-level professional MMA. Okay, fair enough. But would you have said the same thing if these two had just done Rock'em Sock'em Robots? Because I see a lot of men's fights that are no better than that one in terms of the level of technique, but fans just heap on praise because these guys go out and kill each other with that whole lot of technique. That, to me, is not an improvement. I would like to see action, sure. I don't want to see action necessarily at the expense of technique, except in the rarest of circumstances. So, I agree with you. I'm not ready to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I don't think these women, this is as good as it's going to get. The level of talent's going to improve. But take the same discriminatory eye that you're casting on this fight and apply it universally. Demand more, demand better. You know how we do. Can't believe I don't have a sponsorship from them yet. All right. Luke, MMA journalist Eugene Robinson lists the following reasons why Jon Jones should leave Greg Jackson and join AKA or another fight team. Number 1, Jackson Winklejohn is great for up-and-comers, champions plateau. In post-fight press conferences, Jon said after round 1, he improvised the rest of the fight instead of sticking with the original game plan. Jackson's best advice was breathe, Jon, no substantive tactical advice. I didn't hear any of that, so I can't comment on much about that. 3, other camps would develop his killer instinct better. Agree or disagree? You might have a point about the killer instinct stuff. I'm not sure that that's a bad point, but I don't agree with the first point. If anything from that fight, we can take away from the perspective of evaluating the things Jon didn't do well. I thought the wrestling was sort of a big red flag for me. But in terms of the striking, I thought this was something of a coming-of-age moment for Jon. I thought that between the last fight, where he was basically fighting out of a deficit for 3.5 rounds, because he poured it on late in the fourth and then certainly took the fifth. I thought that this fight evidenced the fact that he is one hell of a striker, basically without analog, because he has adapted a striking style to his sense of timing, his sense of distance, and his sense of creativity and mixing. Like in the post-fight press conference, he was asking that he admitted he threw an axe kick, which is the one where it comes basically sort of around as short a circle as possible and then straight down. You strike with the heel, you know. Which you saw Crow Cop do in Mark Hunt. You've seen a few other examples. They did that in Pride, but he admitted it has no power, but he was trying it. This dude is trying out axe kicks that he knows don't really work that well in fights, just to sort of see how far he can push himself. I mean, he's an incredible talent, and I think the way he mixes up punches and elbows and knees, and the way he, I asked him, like, why didn't you throw knees in the clinch? Because there's a lot of moments, man, in that second and third rounds where he was literally like bicep gripping Glover and not throwing knees, and his answer was he wanted to just wear on Glover's arms. I mean, this is like high-level stuff, the way he's talking about it. So I think that Jon continues to prove that he is getting better and better and better and better. Admittedly, not in all facets. We don't know. We didn't really get a good sense of jiu-jitsu out of him, and certainly the wrestling needs some work. But it's really not true generally that he isn't developing. He quite clearly is developing. I didn't hear any of the corner advice. I don't know, but you mentioned after one he improvised the rest of the fight. Well, the game plan was smart. They really wanted to mix up the wrestling, but what happens when Jon can't get it? Then you have to adapt. But the guy's fight IQ is so high that he was able to make it work. 3, develop his killer instinct better. You might have a point there. I do wonder about whether or not. I mean, I think if guys already have that kind of style of fighting, like a Donald Cerrone, they leave them to their own devices. But I don't know if they necessarily sharpen them in that direction. They sharpen them to win exchanges. They sharpen them to win clinch battles. They sharpen them to win guard passing battles. They sharpen them to win all of these sort of moments of interaction. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure that they practice finishing each other, but it doesn't evidence itself as much as you would think it might. So maybe you have a point there, but also, the bond and the trust that he's developed with them is going to be hard to replicate. Although I will say it could be kind of amazing to watch Daniel Cormier and Kane and Jon Jones mix it up at the gym a lot. That'd be kind of amazing, right? Why do people refer to jiu-jitsu matches and boxing matches as fights? I really never understood that logic, and it gets on my nerves. When they refer to such as fights, does it bother you as well, or am I the minority? I don't mind calling boxing fights fights. I don't know why. I do mind people when they call jiu-jitsu fights fights. And everyone does it. You can't stop them. They do it in that world, but yeah, I don't like it either. Arlovsky back in the UFC. What do you make of the announcement of Arlovsky back in the UFC? Was the fact that Anthony Johnson turned out to be a much better fighter than everyone thought helped his case a little bit more since Anthony beat Arlovsky in World Series of Fighting? I don't think it has anything to do with it. I think they need people to fill out cards that people know. I don't think it's any more complicated than that. I actually go back to the scrum. I asked Dana White, have you seen any of his recent fights? The answer was no. So they didn't bring him back because they thought he was like mega talented. They probably looked at his record, 6-1-1 in his last 8 fights. When he announced it on Twitter, I can tell you that the traffic exploded. So they're still interested in him, at least as a UFC fighter. But it's got nothing to do with Anthony Johnson. It's got nothing to do with the fact that they need dudes on these cards who've got some name value. Jon Jones measuring his distance. I knew this was going to come up. What do you think about Jon Jones using open hands to measure his range? Everybody talks about a warning, but Dan Miragliotta gave him a warning at the beginning of the fight. Yet he didn't follow up on the warning, and Jones was allowed to do it the entire fight. Why do fighters have to get 3, 4, 5 warnings about holding the cage or doing other stuff? Give one warning and deduct a point afterwards, is my opinion. Then fighters will take the warning seriously. So there's a lot of ways to sort of parse this out. The first thing I'd like to say is, if you watch like a Pacquiao or Mayweather or a major pay-per-view event, you often see the backstage meeting between the fighter, the people in their entourage / corner, and then the referee of the big main event. And he'll say, listen, do this, I expect this out of you. Do that, I expect that out of you. Do you have any questions for me? No. So by the time they get to the fight, do you have any further questions? Okay, let's go. I would like to see that in MMA. I'd like to see the referee telling him, John, if you put your hands out like that, this is your warning now. Don't do that. So that if he does it there, maybe you give him one more reminder, and then or not, or maybe you just take a point right away. Either way, I'd be fine with that. But I would like to see that in MMA. I would like to see them borrow that from HBO. HBO broadcasts for boxing, pay-per-view, and otherwise do a really good job of telling you who's in the officiating crew, who's judged, what weird judging decisions have they had, who's the referee, where are they licensed, how long have they been an official. I would like to see that out of UFC broadcasts, and I would like to see the fighter. I don't know if they do it or they don't do it. I would like to see the fighter and the referee ahead of time. And in the case of Jon Jones, be it Herb Dean or John McCarthy or Dan Mergliata or Mario Yamasaki or whoever, telling him, John, please, you're allowed to stick your hand out, but do not put, because he is allowed to extend his arm, and he is allowed to open his hands. Nothing against that is against the rules. What you're objecting to is that he does it and that the fingers slip into the eyes, either intentionally or unintentionally. Because either way, at some point, it doesn't even matter. Even if you grant it's all unintentional, at some point, it's like, dude, it doesn't matter. Like, stop doing it. Whatever you have to do to make that not happen, do that. And I would like to see them do it before the fight even starts, so that you, the viewer, them, the fighters, we're all working from a level playing field. We know everything is above board. We know exactly what they're expected to do. We know exactly what they were warned on. And if they were warned specifically on something like this, which appears to be, as fans believe, a recurring issue, address it before the fight even starts. Don't start the bell ringing as the moment that okay, everyone starts with a clean slate. No, you were warned before the fight even started. Don't do that. Don't do that. Maybe you give them a pass for the first one, or maybe you don't. Either way, I wouldn't care. Either way, take a point for the first one, or give John, this is your last. This is it. This is your last warning. If it happens even slightly one more time, taking a point. And if he does it again, take a point. I have no problem with that at all. At all. Okay? So let's just be clear about that. But what we're sort of getting at here is any fighter, including Jon Jones, is going to do exactly what they want to do within the rules. And if the rules, they don't allow you to poke someone in the eye, but if the referee isn't going to do anything about it, this is going to continue to happen, if not in Jon Jones fights, in plenty of other fights too. And forget, we're focusing on eye gouging or hands in the eyes, whatever you want to call it. Fence grabbing is another one. John Glover, do not grab the fence on a takedown. If you're getting taken down, you just go down or defend without grabbing the fence. Do not grab the fence. If you grab the fence one time at the beginning of the fight, I'm taking a point. So they know. And they work from there. And the audience saw it, and it was recorded. Everything was documented. That is what I want to see. I want to see these trouble spots that some of these fighters seem to find themselves in, be it fence grabbing, be it eye gouging, be it shorts holding, whatever the case may be for all individual fighters. That's what I want to see. Because everyone's sort of focusing on Jon Jones. Bro, it's got a lot more to do with how MMA is officiated than it is Jon Jones. It's revealing itself here in Jon Jones. But it can reveal itself in many instantiations. In many, many, many instantiations. What we want to do is curb the problem, not address Jon Jones specifically, although that comes with it when you address the problem generally. So it's the fighter's responsibility. I'd like to see it part of the broadcast. If they wanted to warn him ahead of time and either take a point for the first offense or give him one warning inside the cage and then take a point, I'm fine with either one of those. But I think you have to start the fight with everybody seeing this dude was warned ahead of time. That is what I would like to see. Now, it's kind of funny that this hands in the eyes issue with Jones is such a big issue, because everyone I can tell you on Media Row, no one that I recall when we went to the post-fight press conference, we didn't really ask that much about it. I mean, I think I got asked maybe once or twice, if that, because it's funny, it really is true. Fights do look different in person than they look on TV. Sometimes they look identical. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they look different in dramatic ways. Sometimes they look different in subtle ways. And I don't think anybody has really come up with a good explanation for why. I mean, yes, you have different viewing angles, but that doesn't really address the issue, because both can be really good viewing angles. A judge has about as good a viewing angle as you're going to possibly get. Why could they sometimes have screwy logic or logic that doesn't comport with what you get on television? No one really has come up with a good explanation for that, and I would like to see why. But here's my point. We definitely noticed the fingers in the eyes at a certain point in the fight between Jones and Teixeira. I didn't see anybody making a big deal of it on press row, because from a live perspective, it looked like a moment in time where he was messing up, that he should have been warned, maybe even having a point taken, and that was it. In other words, and I don't know how this came across on the broadcast, but the eye pokes, whatever you want to say about them, they have nothing to do with how the fights are won or lost. And you can be upset about it, and that's fine, but it's the truth. If you want to say he deserved to have a point taken away, I'm not arguing with you. But in the end, it doesn't define how any of these fights end. It doesn't. That's sort of how it looked on Press Row. On Press Row, it looked like, okay, I don't know what he's doing here, but he needs to stop. The fight continued on at some point, and it was an afterthought. You know, I don't know how it looked in the broadcast. I don't know what Joe Rogan and Mike Goldberg were saying. I don't know how much of a deal the broadcast made about it. It seemed like they must have made a lot about it. But from our vantage point, at least the one I had, it looked like an issue for a bit, and then no more. So, and then going back over his record, you can say it's a consistent problem, but is it a consistent problem that's affected how he's won or lost? No. And none of those guys ever post-fight always say, oh, my eye was messed up, I couldn't see. And you do hear that in other fights. So, no. But, listen, if the way to solve this problem, start with the meeting between the fighter and the referee ahead of time, specifically addressing the issue. Take a moment out of the broadcast to do that instead of talking about corn nuts being corn to the core, and we'll all be better off as a consequence. Right. True or false? Fewer fights will end up on the ground because of the entertainment and the rules. True. Gustafsson versus Jones will happen in Sweden. False. Rockhold is a future champion. False. But I could be wrong. Bruce Lee would have kicked ass in the UFC. I don't know. Sure. Kron Gracie with little striking skills will never be a top 10 fighter. True. Rogan saying GSP making $5 million on every fight, no sponsorship. Might be true. Absurd that Faber's making more money than Barao. Absurd that all these guys make what they make in terms of it being low. True. Kevin Mulhall had some weird stand-ups at UFC 172. True. More competent critical journalists will emerge in the future. I'll say true out of hope. A fighter union will exist in 2020. False. I noticed in boxing matches, especially in Mayweather's matches, he usually has a title alongside to market the pay-per-view events, such as The One with Mayweather Canelo and now The Moment with Maidana. Do you know why the UFC went away from having titles in the pay-per-view events? Because they got tired of making up goofy names. It's the truth. Mandatory point reductions for flagrant fouls. When are the UFC and referees going to start having mandatory point? Well, the UFC can't do it. It can only be the commission. But second part of your question. And the referees are going to start having mandatory point reductions for flagrant fouls, such as eye pokes, groin strikes, and the like. That's the only way it's going to stop, and the fighters know they're going to do it, so you don't think there has to be a penalty applied. What I said before. They go back and watch the Czech Congo fight. I know Czech's not in the UFC, but you get the idea. Czech, do not kick this guy in the balls. If you kick this guy in the balls, I'm taking a point away first time. Maybe he still might do it. I don't know. Maybe he won't. But the point being is you start with a level of understanding. You don't start the fight with a fighter trying to figure out what the referee's limits are. Start the fight understanding what the referee's expectations are. That way the referee has set them, the fighter knows to expect them, and we can work from there. Luke, is there any chance of this fight being competitive? In Mayweather versus Maidana. I will say Showtime somehow sucked me in once again with their all-access show. No. It's a Mayweather fight. I mean, Mayweather fights are, the Cotto fight was definitely a little bit more competitive than I thought it was going to be. Probably Mayweather did too. Although Cotto wound up fading and getting dropped late. But, like, Mayweather picks fights cleverly, man. He's never really, I don't know what you want to say about Pacquiao at this point, but if we're not talking about Pacquiao, he's basically faced anybody else he possibly could, more or less, okay? I know Amir Khan's out there and whatever, but he's basically faced everybody he could, but he always sorts of finds the right times and the right conditions to face them. You know, beating Broner was impressive, and especially the way Maidana did it, just basically backing him up and slugging him out the whole time. But it's not going to work against somebody the talent of Mayweather. Mayweather picks guys he knows he can beat, or at least has a very, very good chance he can beat. But he does it just short of making it, obvious that he can beat them. I mean, it's a talent that Mayweather can sell fights where he's expected to run over this guy. I mean, Maidana is very talented, but he's come forward, bite down on the mouthpiece sort of brawler, and I just think Mayweather's going to handle him. I mean, handle him. He might end up stopping him too. So. And also, listen, upsets happen in boxing all the time. You catch one when you're not supposed to, and you can go down. But it's not like MMA where that really happens, man. It really happens. You just take one the wrong way. You zig when you're supposed to zag, kaboom. Boxing's a little more forgiving that way, especially with a guy with the kind of defensive skills and reflexes of Mayweather. So, you look at the odds. I think he's like a 10, 11 to 1. Mayweather's at minus 1,100. Dude, those are better odds. Those are better odds than Daniel Cormier had for Patrick Cummins. I mean, Mayweather's going to beat the bejesus out of Maidana in all likelihood. And you know what's funny? I heard ads today on the radio on this morning driving into work. This is how Showtime sold it, at least on this radio ad. And I like Steven Espinosa a lot. I like Showtime a lot. I buy the pay-per-view because it's a good card. Mayweather's always a sight to behold. I'm not even bagging on it, man. But just on the radio ad this morning, I swear to Christ, what they said was. They're calling it The Moment. And it was something to the effect of, God, I wish I had recorded it, but it was something to the effect of, will Maidana be able to land the big punch to change the course of history? Which is another way of saying this dude has a puncher's chance. It's like, this is how you're selling it? Can he land the punch? Like, oh my God, even they aren't denying what a blowout is. It's a blowout. It's a blowout. Again, it's fight sports. Anything can happen. Crazier things have happened. But in all likelihood, Mayweather should smoke this guy. Anthony Johnson 2.0. Luke, how would you rate Anthony Johnson's evolution as a fighter? How did his takedown defense look to you in the arena? His takedown defense looked flawless. His sprawl looked impenetrable, man. He looked fantastic. Fantastic. And he was confident all week, by the way. In the run-up with the press. He had a suit on at the press conference or the media day, whatever it was. With a little curmudgeon-y, but not too bad, I mean, all these guys, they're hungry and they don't want to deal with press, so I get it. It's fine. I thought his sprawl was sensational. I thought the hand speed differential was ridiculous. Anthony Johnson looks fantastic. I would have liked to see him put it on Phil Davis a little more. Phil Davis, I think, not getting credit. Phil Davis didn't win that fight anywhere, but he did avoid getting finished. He did avoid taking most of the big shots. He did block a lot of stuff. So I still think that what I saw was in pockets. In the wrestling defense game, he had great stuff. In the pure stand-up game, he had great stuff. I like to see him blend it a little bit more, But, I mean, to come from World Series of Fighting, where he's fighting Mike Kyle and then heavyweight Arlovsky and all kinds of craziness, and then to go and beat Phil Davis. And by the way, Phil Davis, listen, I know it's controversial, but he did beat Lyoto Machida. He at least was competitive with Lyoto Machida. He took down Lyoto Machida. And he couldn't take down nothing on Anthony Johnson. Pretty incredible. So, A-plus stuff from him. Need to see more. No doubt about it. We'd like to see him get some good experience, but how do you not have high praise for that guy? Well, crazy story. Behind me on press row, first row of the stands, but I could hear them plain as day. Fight started out going as it went. You could hear Michael Johnson out of the Black Zillions, kept calling for the left high kick from Anthony Johnson, and he just kept saying it over and over again. And then the fight was, didn't go so well for Phil Davis. And so Mike Easton, who has a fight coming up with Yves Dubois, was behind shouting for him. And so it became this back and forth between Mike Easton and Michael Johnson to see who could root their guy on the most. And at some point, they both started laughing because as they got towards the end of the fight, you could hear Mike being like, you got to try something. And I think he whispered over Michael Johnson, it's like, doing the best we can here, you know what I mean? Black Zillions fight team. Luke, having seen fighters such as Michael and Anthony Johnson prove leaps and bounds in their development, just how good is the Black Zillions fight team despite not having a current UFC champion? Well, certainly, I don't know how good they are. but they've come a long way from the moment where they were getting lambasted for being terrible and always losing, having that horrible streak. Yeah, it's pretty clear that they can take guys who have potential and athleticism, and they can have them turn the corner to at least be top contenders. Whether they can go to the next level and produce a champion or multiple champions, and I know they have one in Eddie Alvarez, but you know what I mean. Whether they can do that is another question. If you go back and watch the documentary with John Fitch in the run to the GSP fight, you hear Dave Camarillo and you hear Javier Mendez saying, bringing a world champion, a UFC champion to the gym is everything. It's everything. Can we do it as a team? Can we recruit the guys? Can we develop them? Can we get them the right fights? Can we groom them to such a point where they become top contenders, get a title shot, which itself is hard enough to do, and then capture one? It's one thing for a fighter to want to achieve those things, but it means almost as much for a coach. It's very much a validator for a coach. Look at the glee on the face of Mark Lehman when Johnny Hendricks won. And why is he feeling that way? In part because he probably has a deep bond with Johnny Hendricks. They're probably friends. They're mentors. But the other part about it is that they're kind of in this together. It's all Johnny's. Don't get me wrong. He's the one that executed it. But there is a piece of Johnny that is Mark Lehman. There's a piece of him that is, the two are inextricable in some ways, especially when they've been coached together that long, And so having a coach who can get these guys, especially in the case of Michael Johnson, develop them, turn them into something, and then have them turn that final corner where they capture it and even defend a world title. That is a hugely validating moment for a coach, and it's why a lot of camps sort of have this mark over them where they can't quite get there, or at least they can't get there for years at a time. When George St. Pierre leaves, let's see how long it takes for TriStar to have another UFC champion there. Same with any of these guys. When a UFC champion departs, it's a big deal. It's a very big deal. Yes, for the fighter, but that fighter, when they have those long developed bonds with the coach, which is why it's sort of silly to say Jones should go to AKA, is that it's a validation for the coach too. It's a big deal to bring home a world champion, man. Not in and of itself, like, oh, we have a world champion here, but what does it mean for you? What did you do as a coach to help facilitate that? It's proof of concept. Jon Jones, Nike apparel. Luke, in the Dana White Scrum, you asked a question about why not let Jon Jones wear Nike apparel even if Nike doesn't want to pay the sponsorship tax. What did you think of Dana's answer? I disagree. I mean, it's his business. They don't care what I think. But it's true. I wanted to research something. I don't know whether this is true or not. It's true that these leagues have deals with these apparel makers. But I think there are exceptions. Like if you have a Reebok shoe, you're allowed to wear it. If you have a Nike shoe, you're allowed to wear it. If you have an Adidas shoe, you're allowed to wear it. So there's all these workarounds that they have. I also don't know this to be true. I want to see what part of the collective bargaining agreements on the player side addresses how the league handles these apparel deals. In other words, it's one thing to say, well, we as a business, NFL, NBA, whoever, we have an apparel deal, so whatever, it's with Nike, whatever it is. How much of the terms of that deal is defined by the contours of the deal in the collective bargaining agreement? In other words, it doesn't happen without their consent in some form or another, or it doesn't happen without their benefit in some form or another. So it's not that I oppose the idea necessarily of the UFC having a deal with Under Armour, if that's who it's rumored to be. That's fine, but I don't think it should happen at the complete exclusion of other brands that really sort of enhance the UFC brand or fighter, monetization opportunities. I don't know this to be true. I want to see. I don't know what the final truth of that is. I want to look into it, but that's what the question I have. I didn't have it at the time when I asked the question. I just didn't know. But the more I thought about it, I was like, well, how does the collective bargaining agreement handle this? These apparel deals that the league signs with companies. To what extent does that influence the language in those deals and how it affects athletes? That's sort of my issue there. Thoughts on the Gunnar Nelson-Ryan LaFleur matchup? Dude, that's going to be great, man. I think it's a good fight for both guys, actually. In the end, I think LaFleur will probably lose because I think Nelson will probably have enough for him on the ground, and he's got a little bit more than him standing. But that's a hell of a scrap, man. That's going to be, you're going to see welterweights just rocking and rolling, all kinds of positional advancement and great stuff. And guys, it's going to be a tough fight. It's going to be a grueling fight. Wouldn't be surprised, honestly, if LaFleur won. I think because he's a much better wrestler and control position guy. But love it. Great fight. Can't wait. I've already talked about Eddie Bravo and GSP. Talked about boxing camps. Who would have the best chance of taking down Daniel Cormier in any combat sport? In any combat sport? I mean, the Cuban Greco guy, Mijain, at 120 kilos, he could take down Daniel Cormier. Tune-up fights. Luke, you mentioned in your last chat that it's beneficial for high-level fighters to have a tune-up fight. Do you think that is part of how Overeem was able to rebuild his career after suffering numerous losses at light heavyweight? I mean, that's absolutely how he did it. Part of what? How many guys did Overeem finish with standing guillotine before he got to Strikeforce? You know, with the exception of like Jon Jones versus Oda Machida, if you're finishing dudes with standing guillotines, they suck. I think he had like 2 or 3 of them. You know, these were fights made to. What does a tune-up fight do? It usually delivers a finish, not always, but usually, and it makes the guy who's better look good. That's how you sell a guy. How good did Dustin Poirier look in the Akira Corsani fight? Plus, he got pushed a little bit in that fight, at least in that first round, you know, and was able to come back and persevere. Didn't take a whole lot of damage, and was able to come back and crush him in the second round. It made Dustin Poirier look good. It made you interested in him. That's what they do. So, like, it's got a sales pitch to it because the guy looks better, and it's got a real value. The guy gets to make some money, doesn't take a ton of damage doing it, probably. I mean, there's always exceptions, but you get the idea. Gets to work on some techniques, gets to showcase his talent, gets the experience of cutting weight and getting in there, doing media, all that stuff. So that when he has a bigger, more important fight, it feels more normal to him. That's how you're supposed to do it, man. And listen, you can't do too many of them. You can't have fights where it's all the time tune-ups, where it's all the time getting murdered, but because you're fighting all the best constantly, unless you're a title contender. That's the only real exception that you should have. A champion. Champions, I don't think should be getting tune-up fights. But you get the idea. Like, it works for everybody. If you use them smartly, in a moderated way, I fail to see what the issue is here. If you're going to have oversaturation, I know it's a big topic of debate. I'm just saying, whatever you want to call it. If you're going to do this many fights and this many cards, this is one clear benefit of it. You're going to get elite guys, more experience, where they're going to get in between these ridiculous, crazy, hard, tough fights, the chance to just look awesome and inspire confidence. It's a good thing. It's a good thing. It's crazy because that's how someone becomes a star a little bit, right? Like, how does someone become a star? All kinds of ways. Engaging personality, big mouth, sensational skill. But on the skill side, and everyone's got their own formula. But like, look at Fedor. How many tune-up fights did Fedor have? A lot. He had a lot of fights where he was fighting bozos. Even the Fujita fight where he got rocked and came back was stuff of legend, you know. The point being is, one of the ways that people become bigger than who they are as celebrated athletes in the fight game is by winning and winning impressively. Nurmagomedov has done it on the back of, you know, just fighting one tough guy after another. But the reality is you can get there sometimes by fighting tune-up fights in between. It's the truth, man. It's how you become interesting. Win fights, and win fights spectacularly over and over and over again. Rank the fights you're most intrigued about from top to bottom. I will go with Jones-Gustafsson 2, Weidman-Machida, Pettis-Melendez, Velasquez-Verdun. People asking how much has he improved. I sort of addressed this already. Um, I would say that the takedowns need some substantial work and improvement, but I think the striking has really come a long way. But I've already answered that one. Luke, what do you make of Dino Cormier asking Jon Jones for a title shot? I find it weird, especially when Cormier knows Jones dislikes him and trolls him every chance. Why wouldn't he ask? Squeaky wheel gets the grease. All you guys were battering Jon Jones. Why is he asking for this? Trying to play matchmaker. This is how fighters get what they want. They push for it. Not all the time. Doesn't always work. But you're not going to get what you don't ask for. If you make it known this is what you want, if you put heat, if you try to create some kind of controversy or intrigue or momentum behind it, and you do it because you're vocal about it, you may not get what you want, but you may get pretty close. Or you may get what you want. Why not do it? Let these guys do it. I don't know what the big issue is. If it's Cormier, great. If it's Gustafsson, great. If it's Jones, I don't care. Doesn't bother me at all. Best of the night was the Luke Rockhold one. Velasquez Verdun. Luke, I watched the press conference, and my thoughts were that Kane better start brushing up on his Spanish, or his ethnic advantage will wear down pretty quick. Verdun was not only far more fluent in Spanish, but I felt he came off as the more likable person. There were moments I don't think Velasquez understood half the things Verdun was saying. Verdun also has more presence in the Latino market, as he often does work as a commentator in UFC in Spanish, for the UFC in Spanish. Do you think Kane will ever really be the face of the UFC for the Latino market? Well, first of all, let me say he already is the face of the Latino market. Let's just be real. In the end, they're not going to root for a Brazilian guy who speaks better Spanish than they are for a Mexican guy. It's not going to happen. Or, half Mexican, half American. Whatever you want to call it. Ethnically Latino of Mexican origin. It's not going to happen. Trust me. However, and I've been saying on this chat for a long time, not because I'm some brilliant Spanish speaker, but my wife, the only time my wife speaks English is with me and at work. That's it. You know what I mean? Almost the overwhelming majority of her friends are all South Americans. And her family, obviously, they don't speak. I mean, they all speak English, but they don't. Not when I'm around, they don't. They all speak Spanish to one another. So, born and raised from Colombia, and she was listening. She was like, "Woof!" Verdun's Spanish is, miles ahead of Kane. Kane's is very, from what I'm told, functional Spanish, but Verdun is just outright fluent. Although I'm told Verdun has a bit of a Brazilian accent, Portuguese accent, or not Portuguese, but Portuguese Brazilian accent in Spanish, but it's significantly more fluent. Which is why it was one of the reasons that I was like hopeful that, not hopeful, but if you were going to do an Ultimate Fighter in Mexico and you wanted to have two coaches, it made more sense to have Verdun than Brown. I didn't think Verdun was going to do that to Brown. I was wrong about that, but yeah, it worked out kind of nicely. I think Kane's fine with the Spanish. I've seen him do media tours down there, but I've been telling you, if you've been watching this chat, I've been saying a long time that Kane's Spanish. It's not fluent. It's not. Also, but you know who does speak fluent Spanish? Ricardo Lamas. Really, really good. And not surprisingly, but I just never heard him use it. Jorge Masvidal. That's one thing I want to see, man. Like Jorge Masvidal, I want to see him open his mouth a little bit because the guy is so good. He's really coming to his own as a technical fighter. He's got a hell of a story. He speaks Spanish. They're entering these Spanish markets. Get him on these cards, man. I know he's not Puerto Rican, but if they go to Puerto Rican, if they go there in 2015, put him on that card. Have this guy do media. Ricardo Lamas, by the way, is awesome with it. He can do it very well, really well, good Spanish. So, obviously Eric Perez is Mexican, but yeah, Verdun is going to be a great addition for them. UFC really lucked out in that regard to have those guys. To be able to have Verdun speak Spanish the way he does and be able to navigate that market as a fluent. He can do much more media, much more effective media. He can make jokes in Spanish. One sort of way someone is really proficient as a speaker in a language is if they not only understand humor, but they have the ability to go back and forth with humor. That's one sort of tell, and he's really good at it. So his Spanish is excellent. Over 50,000 buys for the Bellator pay-per-view. Care to make a prediction? I'm going to say somewhere between 50 and 75. Who thinks it might get 100? I don't think he told me this in confidence. I think this is public information I can share. I hope it is. Jack Encarnação from Sherdog Rewind, he thinks it'll do 100. I don't know if I'm as confident as him. I'm not saying it won't. I'm not saying it will. If I had to guess, somewhere between 50 and 75, but I don't know. I don't know. But Jack believes it could do 100 or more. Is UFC making a mistake in Mexico? For years they've wanted to go to Mexico City, and they're finally there. But they're doing just a typical UFC show, nothing special. Instead of the Mexico City Arena, should they have gone to Plaza del Mexico? Seems like doubling up with Kane, Verdum, and Pettis Melendez, along with a tough Latin American finale in Mexico City, would be a great opportunity for a stadium show and a better debut than a generic guys fighting UFC event. No, I see what you're saying. I'm not. What you're pointing out is it couldn't be even bigger than it is, sure, but they probably don't want to overcommit to a market for the first time. If they're not, if there's not that there's hesitancy necessarily, but you know, it's not the same as going to Canada or Toronto the first time. It's not the same. That had a lot of indigenous. Canada had a much more developed indigenous mixed martial arts scene, much more filled out roster space, significantly higher level of talent there, much more acceptance of it and awareness of it culturally. Mexico's still in the very early stages of that kind of development. They may get to a point where it even surpasses Canada, but it's not where we are now. Yeah, listen, I'm not saying that Pettis Melendez in the Latin American finale wouldn't be better. Of course it'd be better, sure. But I think that when you go to these, this is the first time they went to Baltimore, right? I mean, Baltimore, like, I don't know. I mean, the key to really measuring a market is not the first time, but the second and third time that the UFC goes there. But for the first time going there, I mean, Baltimore was all over, man. They sold out. They went to everything. They were there. That Joker was half full before the first event even started. I bet you Mexico's going to go crazy for this, so it'll be fine. Sky Valley has a good question, but it's just too long for me to answer. I might be saying something obvious, but do you think there's a lower education level of casual MMA fans than casual fans of other sports? I was at UFC 172, my first live UFC event, and didn't feel like the crowd was very well educated. I'm used to correcting noobs that say stupid stuff during football and baseball games, but I found myself going nuts by some of the I-trained UFC bros around me. I've seen writers commenting on how they were impressed by the crowd, but being from Baltimore, I feel like the majority of the atmosphere was mid-major market elated that the UFC had finally come to Baltimore. The biggest applauses of the night came when Anthony Johnson said, "What's up, Baltimore?" when Jon Jones did the Ray Lewis dance. And when Ray Lewis was partly in the shot with Chuck Liddell, and Bruce Buffer said live from the sold-out Baltimore Arena in Baltimore, Maryland. I don't think the arena was filled from open to close because they knew Chris Beal was legit. I think it's a not very affluent town that shelled out a few $100 each for each tickets and wanted to watch every single minute of fighting. Additionally, I think the crowd loved Jon Jones more so because they actually know who he is, not because his brother played here, only really starting for 1.5 years. I think Jones. I wouldn't undersell that connection to Arthur. I think it's kind of big. But to your point, well, it's true that, I mean, we always talk about this. If you go to UFC shows in Vegas or whatever, the casual fans don't really know a whole lot, and they can run the gamut from any kind of socioeconomic background. But that's really the hardcores that sort of define how things are cheered and not cheered. Not in totality, but if you're running the mill fight somewhere in the middle of the card, if a guy gets a guard pass, you're not going to hear thunderous applause, no, but people often cheer at one time because they'll have insight, and people might cheer because they just see advancement, movement. That's sort of, you can, from a macro perspective, understand what's happening there. So the two aren't, what you're describing is probably real, but the two aren't really mutually exclusive. If they see, what MMA fans want to see out of a fight is things that aren't static. They want to see you affect change. They don't want to, and when I say static, I don't mean still. I just mean where the fight isn't progressing one way or the other. What they want to see is, and when I say action, I don't mean just banging him out, but trying to positionally move on a guy, trying to hurt him, trying to throw him, trying to get around him, trying to do things, and then being successful at it. Which is why some of the flyweights might have some issues, at least over an extended period of time. So they like to see change effective. So I think that might be what you're talking about there. Is that the hardcores are like, oh my God, look at that knee cut across path. He had the underhook on the far side so he can get his back taken. Amazing. And then the donks are like, yeah, he got around his legs. Do something. Yay. And so they converge at that moment. Luke, what did you make of Dana's comments regarding Vitor's future? Kind of got the impression that we may not ever see Vitor again unless he can really pull some magic within the Nevada Commission. And, using only facial expressions, tell me how you feel about Chael's and Hendo's latest comments that coming off TRT is not that much of a hassle after all. Well, I mean, of course, I mean, it's not, especially when we don't need it. But, no, I did not get the sense that Dana was suggesting subtly that Vitor won't be back. I think what Dana is tired of Vitor, that Vitor is a constant headache for him, that TRT has... When Dana White says TRT has been a nightmare for him, I think he's telling the truth. I mean, think about it. When he goes to those scrums, right, which he does, he doesn't have to do, but when he goes to those scrums, what do you think he wants to talk about? Do you think he wants to talk about selling the fight that he's there for, whatever it is, Jones versus Glover, Verdun versus... Do you think he wants to talk about that, or do you think he wants to talk about negligent drug testing? What do you think he wants? He wants to talk about selling a fight. Now, obviously, those issues are going to come up, and he's got to deal with it. Okay, fine. But just thinking like TRT has been the biggest hassle ever, and partly because of their own fault. They didn't want to adopt the positions all over the place. So he brought this on himself a little bit, but that's real. I think he wants to go in there and just talk about, like, oh my God, can we please just talk about the fight that I'm trying to sell? That would definitely be his perspective, and understandably so. So I did not get the sense, though, that he doesn't think Vitor is going to be back. I think what you got was a palpable sense of how frustrated he is with the whole TRT thing, and with Vitor's complicated issues related to it, and how it's affected their ability to put on fights that they want to fight or they want to stage. It's a big impediment. And then Vitor coming out and saying, I'm ready because I did home tests, like. This is entirely insufficient nonsense. It's a distraction, and what you're seeing there is probably just a little bit of frustration on Dana White's face that, this guy's a little bit out for lunch. And I think he will be back. I'm very confident he will be back, but it's going to take a little time. Luke, do you believe Dana when he says the male demographic is the only one that matters for ratings? Partly, yes. Partly. When the UFC announced their deal in August, I believe, of 2011, and I think Kane versus Junior, the first one was in November, something like that, of 2011. I spoke that day. You can look it up. I put it on YouTube. I spoke that day to John Orand of the Sports Business Journal. The Sports Business Journal is basically like the Wall Street Journal for sports executives. It's an extremely expensive publication about the business of sports. Television rights, acquisitions, growth into markets. That's what it is. It's the Wall Street Journal basically for sports. The people who read it are executives and front office staff basically. And he's one of their top writers. And it was in D.C. actually. And I asked him about, what is it in for Fox? I mean, it sounds sort of obvious. UFC has done well for themselves. But what is Fox looking for in this deal? Why do they do the 7-year deal with us? What are they looking for? And he mentioned a few things, but the one he really sort of honed in on was the fact that these guys, 18 to 49, and more specifically 18 to 34, that advertisers covet that are hard to reach, the UFC, even better than other major sports, is excellent at reaching. They really have a grasp on them in a way that other sports don't. Now, certainly that's not the case in totality, but there is a consistent ability of the UFC to reach across and grab those guys where other sports, they may get larger audiences. They may cut across demos in the ways that UFC can't. But that's a real thing for them. And it's true. That part of what he's saying is absolutely true. The ability to get those guys and the way that the UFC is able to get them should not be discounted. However, we also can't deny that while they won that night, which is good for the event, I don't think it was even on par with historical averages even in those demos. It also was lower aggregately. So one, you have to worry about whether or not you may win that night, but are you maintaining the same level of them across events? That's sort of partly troubling. The other one is, um, when does it matter to get more than that demo? Yes, you can get that demo in spades, but if you're banking on that, that's all you have. I can tell you that when Ronda Rousey fights, women come over to my house because they're my friends with my wife to watch her compete. So, like, at what point, and I didn't get a chance to answer this, at what point do female demographics matter? At what point do other adult demographics matter? At what point do aggregate the ability for the Ultimate Fighting Championship to cut a wide swath across the sporting public? Because one thing that the NFL's been really good at is attracting women to their game. Dude, that ups your ability to get, like, if you're a brand, depending on what your brand is, obviously, but if you're a brand that has that's trying to have wider exposure, the NFL is where it's at now because it cuts across such a wide swath of sports fans, young, old, parents, kids, male, female. Like, it reaches everybody. That's a superior suite of that's a superior amalgam of fans to sell advertisers to. Right? That's a better mix. So what UFC has as the ace in the hole is that it has this highly coveted, very hard to reach one, and that should not be undersold. But to me, it seems like if what you're looking for is integration, what you're looking for is wider acceptance, what you're looking for is to really dig your heels into the sporting world. It's true you can use that to brag about, but then you have nothing else. That to me is kind of troubling. And what happens when they grow up? Do you have this continued ability to relate to them? So far, so good. But I think in the end, he's probably right that what they're really looking for are the UFCs to get these guys. But if you're the UFC, you have to ask yourself, how do we grow? How do we keep these guys and get other viewers? How do we really become something more than what we are? And that there is the trick. Jim Miller versus Khabib Nurmagomedov. What are your thoughts on Jim Miller? He seems to just come up short against top guys. Can he get to that next level? That submission he got at 172 was deliciously brutal, and him and Khabib would be one hell of a scrap. Right. Yes, it would be. In fact, I was the one who asked Dana and Jim at the presser about it. Would be a great scrap. I think Nurmagomedov would run over him, unfortunately. Might be close at first, but in the end, I think Khabib is just too much for. I think Khabib is too much for everybody not named Anthony Pettis or Gilbert Melendez. Maybe even Ben Henderson too. But that's the fight I want to see. That's really the only people I think that can hang with him at all at this point. Baltimore, an educated crowd. Were the fans in Baltimore educated on the sports or just thankful for UFC being in town? I heard almost no boos, and it was so satisfying. Like I said, I think it was a mixture of both. But I can tell you that one thing that was sort of weird was that I heard a couple of donks. Oh, my God. What fight was that? God. Oh, yes. This is, MMA fans for you. Behind press row, I heard, so during the Tekanome Gomi Isaac Valley flag fight, I heard a bunch of dudes behind me screaming out like the only words they knew that were related to Japanese culture or Japanese. So that if Takanori Gomi landed a big punch and go, sushi! Or Godzilla! Swear to God. They were going sushi and Godzilla. Or, I think one time the guy yelled out noodles, as if noodles are like exclusive to Japan or something. But whatever. Didn't even know the difference between like udon, soba, whatever. So don't get me wrong, there was definitely some of that. But at the same time, I heard a bunch of people trying to start USA chants, and they got drowned out when the crowd started shouting, "Go me, go me, go me." So, like, I think what happened was, it was one of these shows where there were a lot of casual fans, but there were a lot of hardcore fans too. A lot of dudes who train jiu-jitsu with their jiu-jitsu team shirts on. You may find that douchey, but I'm just saying, like, looking around and surveying, I think there was just enough hardcore casual fan harmony to have the right kind of outcome as a crowd. Big John torn ACL. Luke, you see Big John McCarthy tore his ACL in the last few minutes of the Verdun Brown fight. Ever since I followed MMA, I get nightmares that something simple like this will happen to me. Sucks that a lot of the really bad refs are going to get more chances with Big John gone for the foreseeable future. I agree. That really is terrible. Surprised it doesn't happen more, to be honest. But no. Do I think Jon Jones is a dirty fighter? No, I absolutely do not. The kick is legal. The arm lock is legal. Like, why would you be mad at doing something like? I remember one time when I was still running a bloody elbow, what I noticed was there was a streak there where some of the guys that BJ Penn beat, like when he was beating them, man, he was disfiguring them. Like he was making them look bad. And it wasn't a consistent run. Like he had to go back to, uh, God, who did he beat a Rumble on the Rock? Was it Gomi he beat a Rumble on the Rock? I think so. He had to go back to one of those fights to be like, just how bad he's making some of these guys look. And I put together a slideshow, and it was sort of amazing. And people were like, "Oh my God, it was so amazing!" The ability to disfigure these guys and make them look so bad. The mask of blood that Stevenson had, and the huge laceration that Diego Sanchez had. There was a time when we were like celebrating this. Jon Jones does it, and all of a sudden he's dirty. Like the fact that he ripped out of its socket Teixeira's arm, you should be celebrating that. Not that you don't like Glover Teixeira, but that you have someone who is a maestro of you know such an ability to use human anatomy against itself. Such an awareness of how to do that. Oh, the arm's not supposed to go that way. Let me push it that way. I mean, and such expert ability to do that. You should be thankful that there's a guy who can do that in sport today. You should be thankful that there's a guy who pushes the boundaries of the rules. What are the acceptable limits? And this guy damages another guy's knees. Like Jon Jones is so good at fighting that he doesn't just beat other guys, he leaves them damaged for life. You should be thankful that there's a guy in MMA who's that good. You should be thankful. And realistically, the difference between this and a KO punch that causes a concussion is, we're just sort of, differences without a distinction in terms of the quality of their long-term health. Frankly, a kick to the knee is not even as bad as maybe one of these horribly concussive blows that some of these guys take. So the argument, in some level, doesn't even make sense. But my point is that you have a guy in Jon Jones who has such an awareness of human anatomy that he's able to destroy it in the course of fights. You should be thankful. If you're a combat sports fan, you should be thankful there's a guy like that who exists, who is such a threat like that, who is who has the presence of mind and the ingenuity to make it all happen. The fingers in the eyes, should he be warned? Yeah, of course. We already talked about that. I mean, yes. No doubt about it. The fingers in the eyes is an issue, I'm not going to go back into it, but yeah, sure, warn him. Take a point. I have no issue with that. Take a point. Sure, I don't care. Fine. I think he's going to beat these guys anyway, And in the end, you can't point to a single one of these wins that has anything to do with how the fingers in the eyes went. Not one time. So no, I think he's a dirty fighter. No. Could he be good? Is he being a little sloppy in some of those positions? Yeah, of course. Is he maybe even taking advantage of the referee's reluctance to do anything? Maybe. Possibly. Who knows? Doesn't matter in the end. It's the referee's job to fix it. And as far as the other stuff is concerned, you should be thankful that there is a guy who is a master of damage in the way that Jon Jones is. That you are living in an era where you see someone who is so good that he affects these guys permanently. Not that I'm happy that Glover Teixeira got his arm ripped. I've had that surgery. Believe me, it sucks. But that's the game we're in. And if you want to play with Jon Jones, you better be ready. This is the hurt business, not to hurt you. Oh, I'll hurt you a little bit. Is it okay? I hurt him enough. We stop the fight now? No, this is the hurt business. And if it's legal, you're gonna get it. Here we go. Jones's takedowns versus Gustafsson. Against Teixeira, Sonnen, Belfort, Evans, and Machida, Jon Jones landed 9 of 17 takedown attempts, roughly 52.9% accuracy, an accuracy above the UFC average of 41%. But against Gustafsson, Jones struggled, landing just 1 of 11 attempts. Here might be why. Jones lands his attempts with much greater efficiency from a clinch position, 23 of 37, 63% accuracy, versus an outside shot, 7 of 22%, 31.8% accuracy. For his UFC career, he's landed 23 takedowns from the clinch and 7 from outside shots. Against Gustafsson, Jones attempted 8 outside shots, something he statistically does not do well with. Think about that. He attempted 8 shots against Gustafsson and 14 shots in all of his other fights in the UFC combined. Credit should go to Gustafsson, who didn't allow Jones to get in deep in on him on clinch positions, but Jones didn't adjust and change his tactics away from the outside shots. Are there obvious adjustments Jones can make to find takedown success against Alex? Or do you think Gustafsson's skill set matches up perfectly against Jones's wrestling? It's a good point. Although I think one of the takedowns he got was from, against Glover, was from the outside. Although one he also stuffed too. But also, I thought the way in which Glover stuffed a lot of those, I mean, he may have had a higher average than the UFC average against Glover, but I still thought that Glover exposed, it was a continuation of some of what we saw from the Gustafsson fight. If that makes any sense. There's some continuity there. I definitely feel like that will have some adjustments. I mean, one is all the setups to him. When he does the outside shot, he never sets it up. That's partly the reason for the issue. Just getting on my phone, son. Oh, got a. Someone was asking, by the way, about the Arena Ciudad in Mexico City. Our boy Rodrigo del Campo says the venue in Mexico City seats 22,000 plus. Big place. There you go. Let's see. All right, back to the wrestling. Yeah, I think the setups for the shots is part of the issue. He doesn't really do that very well. In fact, one time that Davis got in deep on Johnson in that third round, he landed one clean shot and got in deep. Now, Davis was still not able to complete it, but you don't really see that kind of one-to-one setup. It's very much more segmented. In the clinch, everything is a little more fluid, because in the clinch, you're sort of worried about what's going to come up next. Am I going to eat an elbow? Is he controlling for inside space? He's turning me. Is there a trip coming? Is he going to drop for it? What's he going to do here? So it's just a position where there's naturally a lot more going on, and so it's easier to fake and hide what you're actually trying to do. And then you saw Gustafsson sort of constantly disengage that. The trick is going to be to find a way to get him to do that, or to have some tricks on the outside. But as you mentioned, if he's going to keep, I really believe that the wrestling of Jon Jones needs to turn a corner a little bit. He needs to start finding ways to mix up the outside shots. I think he needs to add some different kinds of shots. I think he needs to find out ways to start doing some chain wrestling. You find that when he does one attempt and they stop it, he doesn't really have a second attempt. Like George St. Pierre, what did I mention before? George St. Pierre would purposely go for a double on Thiago Alves, wait for Alves to dig into double underhooks and pull him up. And when he did that, would use Alves' own pulling motion up to switch to a knee tap, to then drive the hand inside. Like, you don't really see a lot of that from Jon Jones, at least not as much. I'd like to see more of that. For a guy who's got reach like that, he should be able to get his double stuffed and then reach for an ankle pick or any kind of other thing. So he's got some work to do. In the words of Dana White about Vitor Belfort. This one only got 2 recs, but I'll give it a third one. Overrated, underrated. Is top control? It is overrated. Back control, underrated. Takedowns, underrated. Leg kicks, neither. Body punches, underrated. Forward movement, overrated. Evasiveness, also overrated. Which doesn't mean it doesn't have value. It just means that the perceived value outstrips the actual value. Does tough Mexico interest you at all? First of all, it's not tough Mexico. It's tough Latino America, but it has half Mexican, half Nicaraguan, Colombian, Venezuelan, whatever. But does tough Mexico interest you at all? Yeah, it does. You know what? There's been a lot of, and I think intuitively it makes sense. Like, let's push back into Southeast Asia. This is an area that already has, a much more developed scene. And you've got ONE FC there. The history of it, we'll have it in Japan, and of course Muay Thai in Thailand. I mean, the history of martial arts in Asia is, you can go on forever about it. Why not push back into there? But I have to tell you, man, and I could just be my bias. Might well, in fact, be my bias, but I would be lying to you if I got up here. I think long-term, breaking into Latin America will be much more fortuitous for the UFC and for MMA generally. I just feel like, I can't put my finger on it. So it's some sort of hunch. It's some sort of, on the one hand, you have these burgeoning economies. On the other hand, you still have these stratified societies where I believe in the power of poverty to create great combat athletes. Sad as that may be, it's true. But yet, having the world-class systems once they graduate to a level of excellence to facilitate their growth, I think you have that. I think you have cultures that are deeply nationalistic, which helps. I think you have rivalries, which helps. I think you have an appreciation, at least certainly in Central America, not as much as you'd think in South America, although certainly Argentina is a bit of an exception, of respect for and appreciation for, as a spectator sport, combat sports. Not as much, though, So maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it won't go that far. But I think, if nothing else, Mexico will turn out to be a dramatically huge market for the UFC. I don't know how long it's going to take. And I just wonder if, in the end, Latin America is it going to be a slow burn? Is it going to be a boom? What's it going to be? I don't know. But I wonder, because the UFC is just now at a point where they're about to start waving their magic wand over it, And I'm telling you, that TV deal they got is no joke. Like, they're on Caracol in Colombia, dude. Everybody has that. Everybody has that. For my wife, I buy Caracol so we can get it on my DirecTV, and it's on that joint, dude. Like, they're everywhere, man. They're everywhere. They're red. And every time I go to Colombia, my wife goes, there's more and more stuff down there. And that's just little tiny Colombia. What about Peru? What about Chile, which is an advanced economy? What about Argentina has, outside of Brazil, the second most number of black belts in jiu-jitsu. Like, I could be overestimating it, but part of me wonders if not that Asia is over it, but that we're trying to chase history there rather than create a bold new future. And with Latin America, it just feels like this is an opportunity to chart a new path with the raw ingredients that are there. I could be wrong. I don't know. I don't have a great argument for it yet, but I just feel like if they can keep pushing this and this can go the way, that to me is the next big area of growth. I don't really know about Germany, which is Europe's largest economy, even though they already like the Klitschko's in boxing. I don't know about that. I don't know about parts of Scandinavia. I don't know about Russia might wind up being pretty big, obviously. We can see about that. Asia might wind up being bigger than anything. I don't know. I don't really know how this is going to go. But, doing shows, to me, doing shows on Macau is not even on the same wavelength as doing shows in Mexico City. You want to talk about cultural penetration? That is just on another level bigger. Why is it so hard to get things going in China? Like, this is the home of martial arts. Why is it so difficult? It's not that difficult. I mean, it's been difficult in Mexico historically, but things are changing. And by the way, if you haven't paid attention to Mexico, net immigration from Mexico to the U.S. is zero. The middle class there is rising. Their economic growth is higher than Brazil. Like, all the things you need to have a middle class with purchasing power and the right television distribution and the right kind of cultural appreciation for combative athletics. Like, dude, Mexico's got it. It's got it. And it's got modern venues. I don't know, man. If it was me, I feel like something about trying to go to Asia, not that it won't work, not that it can't be more than it is, but there's a little bit of romanticism, a little bit of nostalgia. I don't know that it's really about what we can turn into something that's actually there. In Latin America, I don't feel that way at all. I feel like in Latin America, the wheels are slowly beginning to turn. In the MMA welterweight division, who are the top best 2 or 3 in these disciplines? Boxing. Nick Diaz, George St. Pierre, in his own way, Lawler and Hendricks and BJJ. Well, Nick Diaz is better than all of them. In wrestling, Ellenberger's good. Story's good. Defensively, Alves is good. St. Pierre's good. Obviously, Hendricks is sensational. So, yeah. Oh, Ben Askren. How about that? Do you think Machida has a serious chance of taking the middleweight belt away from Weidman? Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Um, if Phil Davis can take down Lyoto Machida, can Chris Weidman? That's sort of the question I've been running with. Because before I thought, man, Phil Davis took down Lyoto Machida. That's impressive. And then he goes and can't do anything against Anthony Johnson. So what does it mean that he took him down? We have to go back and review the tape and see exactly how he did it. But my thought is, now that you've seen that, do you think that means the chances of Chris Weidman taking Machida down are greater than before? Because I think they are. And if you can take him down, because on the feet, I just think Chris Weidman will get chewed up. But on the ground, if you can get him down and hold him down, he can do a ton of damage. A ton of damage. So, but I don't know. I don't know. But the question is not will Machida win. The question is, does Machida have a serious chance of taking the middleweight belt? Yeah, absolutely, man. That's a great, great fight. I might still lean Weidman, but oof, I don't know. Matt Brown opened as a 2-1 underdog against Eric Silva. Is this crazy or am I crazy? 2-1, I don't know. Here's the issue. Brown is a slow starter, and Eric Silva is a great starter. I think that's a problem. The question is, the longer the fight goes, the more I favor Matt Brown, but that first round is going to be tough for him. Who would win, Bigfoot or Swamp Thing? Swamp Thing, dude. Let's do one more, a couple more from Twitter. Jason Floyd says he thinks that if 50 to 75K thousand for the Bellator pay-per-view would be a good number of buys for them. Do you use the bike share program in Washington, D.C. to move around? I used to, then I bought my own bike. What do you make of Abdel Aziz's comments made today? No more Mr. Nice Guy. Yeah, I mean, threatening fighters to keep them inactive. Like if the UFC did that, you guys would be, or Bell or Bjorn Rebney, you guys would be burning them at the stake. I don't see his comments as substantively different in any kind of way. What about DC waiting for a title shot? That's a difficult one. Because as someone mentioned, what if Jones loses? They're going to do a trilogy fight for sure, right? And they probably do it right away, especially if it's close like the last. Imagine if it was exactly as close as the last one. You would suspect they would do a trilogy match right away. DC's going to wait that out. I mean, it's really, he's rolling the dice. Because on the one hand, you can see a set of circumstances where waiting might make sense. On the other hand, you can equally see a set of circumstances, depending on how events unfold, that could set him back so far that, I mean, he might age, he might get injured, he might lose his chance, and he would really ruin it. He really is rolling the dice. We really have no way of knowing. We just have to see how events unfold. I think it's a little silly because I think he can, I mean, he might be able to beat Jones, and I suspect he could beat Gustafsson too, right? So if he can beat those guys, who can't he beat? I think he can beat Rashad Evans. Maybe he can't, but that's just my hunch. So why not take a fight, stay active when you're much better than all these guys? But maybe it's injury he's worried about. I don't know. The point being is it's entirely dependent on how events unfold. In the end, he'll prove to have been, the risk will have been worth it, or in the end, the risk is absolutely going to backfire. Our boy MJ flipped the script. Just statistically speaking, Phil Davis lands 37% of his takedown attempts. Weidman is at 68%. Chris's striking makes the difference. There you go, folks. So if Davis is going to have enough success to make that happen, can Chris Weidman? And why does this dude ask me about the goddamn bike share program 50 times? so that's it. We have to go. I appreciate everyone's patronage. Be sure to share this around when you're done watching it. Let folks know. I appreciate that greatly because the programmers behind me. The weather in DC is crap today. Super rainy. So thank you for joining me. You can follow me on Twitter at SBNLukeThomas. You can email me at luke.thomas@sbnation.com. I'll be in Denver as of Friday. There is an MMA beat this week, which I'll be on as well. And, of course, don't forget, we'll have all the coverage of Glory and all the coverage of Mayweather Maidana on MMAfighting.com. Thank you for joining me. See you next time. Stay frosty.